What if I told you that the most important moment of The Last of Us isn't one of the jump scares, the zombies, or the emotional breakdowns? It's the very first scene of the show, before the outbreak and before the chaos. It's just a quiet conversation on a 1960s talk show. And it worked because it was able to do something that's really, really hard to do today, which is to get really smart people just like you to believe in a zombie story. Hey, I'm Kwame Christian, founder and CEO of the American Negotiation Institute and host of the #1 negotiation podcast in the world, Negotiate Anything. I'm also a lawyer and an adjunct professor of law at the top-ranked dispute resolution program in the country, and that's given me the opportunity to teach negotiation and communication and conflict resolution at the highest levels. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all of that background and apply it here to this breakdown of The Last of Us. And today we're going to use those skills to break down that opening scene of The Last of Us to answer this simple question. Why was that scene so persuasive? Not just from a storytelling perspective, but from a psychological, emotional, and belief-building perspective. What did they do that worked so well? And what can you take and implement yourself in one of your next difficult conversations? We'll watch the scene together, and then I'll break it down so you can see exactly why this fictional scientist on screen was able to make millions of people all around the world lean in and say, wait, what if that could actually happen? So stick around, because by the end, you'll walk away not just entertained, but sharper and more persuasive as a result. And if you like this content, make sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more. That really helps us to build this audience, because we want to keep serving you. And this is an easy way for you to help us. It only takes 2 seconds for you, but it means a lot to us. And with that, let's get into the breakdown.
And Dr. Newman, you're also an epidemiologist. I presume the prospect of a viral pandemic keeps you up at night as well?
No.
No?
No.
All right, well, that's our show.
Okay, let's pause it right there. This seems really subtle, but you're going to see this dynamic playing out. And this is the framing game. What is the frame of this conversation? So just think about the frame as the storyline of the entire conversation. Hero, villain, is that the story? Is it a funny story? Is it a joking story? Whatever it happens to be. Because what you're going to see here is that the host wants to introduce levity a lot to keep the audience light and feeling good, keep everybody there feeling good. But the scientist, he has something else that he's here to do. And you'll see this tension where the host wants to bring in a comedic frame, but that is rejected. And so by the end of the scene, you'll see which storyline, which frame ultimately wins. But I just want you to keep this in mind, because one of the keys to success in a lot of these conversations is winning the frame game. Which frame wins, yours or theirs? It's like a subtle subconscious negotiation that happens in all of these conversations. So let's keep it going.
Just to be clear, you do think microorganisms pose a threat?
Oh, in the most dire terms.
Bacteria?
No.
You like saying no?
Yes.
Okay, so here we see it again. He introduces a little bit of joke, the audience laughs, but the scientist does not laugh, just stone cold, right? And I like to think about humor as a form of a psychological negotiation that happens, right? And when you think about the negotiation, the subconscious negotiation of humor, what's being offered by the jokester is humor. Right? I'm offering you a laugh and you accept it by laughing. The audience accepted it, but the scientist is focused on maintaining his frame. No laughter. He doesn't even smirk. He just stays really focused. No, this is not a joke. This is very, very serious. He doesn't need to force the gravity on the conversation, but he conveys that with the way that he carries himself.
Not bacteria, not viruses, so...
Fungus. Yes, that's the usual response. Fungi seem harmless enough. Many species know otherwise.
And now this is where we start to bring in the science and the psychology to this scene. This is a masterclass in how you can use science and logic really, really effectively in a tough conversation.
Because there are some fungi who seek not to kill, but to control. Let me ask you, where do we get LSD from?
Where do you get it from?
I want to take a quick pause here, and I want to talk about the eyes of the host, but then 2 other eyes, the letter I. So look right here with the host. Who's he looking at? He's having the conversation with the scientist, but after he makes that joke, again, who does he look to? He turns to the audience. Right? So this is the first eye. Who does he think is important? The most important people to him are in the audience. So what he wants to do is make sure his jokes are still landing. He hears that positive reinforcement. He looks at the people who are most important to him, which is the audience, right? And so that leads us to our second eye, which is impressing. So his goal is to impress the people who are most important. So you realize he's not really trying to engage in a way that is making the scientist in front of him feel good. He's engaging in ways that makes the audience feel good. He's playing to the crowd. And why this is so important to pay attention to is in your social interactions, if you're trying to persuade somebody, you want to figure out who it is that they think is important in this social setting and who are they actually trying to impress. So here's an example. One time I was doing a negotiation training and people were asking questions and engaging and giving their comments, and the boss was sitting in the back. He walked in kind of late. And then once the boss came in and he started to contribute, everybody would turn around completely and look at him. They weren't shifting their whole bodies when their colleagues were talking, but as soon as he would talk, everybody would turn around. Sometimes it's not really clear who the decision maker is or who has the most status, especially if you're new to a circumstance. So pay attention to who other people are paying attention to, and that'll give you an idea of the social hierarchy. But let's get back to this.
Cybin, also a fungus. Viruses can make us ill, but fungi can alter our very minds. There's a fungus that infects insects, gets inside an ant, for example, travels through its circulatory system to the ant's brain and then floods it with hallucinogens, thus bending the ant's mind to its will. Fungus starts.
This is true, and it is terrifying. Can we get a picture of these mind-controlled insects? Because it is one of the scariest things. It controls the actual organism and gets the organism to do things that are advantageous to the fungus that's inside of its brain. It is mind-boggling, but this is true.
Will. Fungus starts to direct the ant's behavior, telling it where to go, what to do, like a puppeteer with a marionette. And it gets worse. The fungus needs food to live.
Now pause for a second. You see that the smile of the host is slowly starting to fade. And what does that tell us? The frame is shifting. He's not the jokester anymore. Now he's locked in. He's saying, wait a second, now this is getting very interesting because I'm following what it is that's coming. So you're seeing now that the scientist, by sticking to his frame, he was able to change the frame of the entire interaction to be more serious. So people are now paying attention to him.
No, it keeps its puppet alive by preventing decomposition. How? Where do we get penicillin from?
Fungus.
All right. And now what we have brilliantly done is set the stage for the zombie part of this story. Because we just talked about the fact that according to science, this is all real in the real world, not just their little fictional world. In our world, there are fungi who can take over the brains of its host and essentially turn it into a zombie. So zombies are real, just not to humans, not yet. And the other thing that I want to point out is the use of questions. So this is like the Socratic method, asking questions and persuading through questions. We often focus so much in negotiation, conflict resolution, and communication on asking questions to gather information. And that's very, very important. But we don't talk enough about the use of questions to persuade people. What we're doing with the questions that we're asking is that we are using our curiosity to control the conversation, because we're seeing that the guy, in order to answer the questions, he has to think logically about what it is that we're talking about. So he is pulling the guy on this journey by making these points and from time to time asking these questions to make sure that he's following. And then because the host is answering these questions, it becomes more persuasive. It's not as persuasive if you're just telling somebody a fact as it is if you ask them a question and then they come to the conclusion themselves.
Where do we get penicillin from?
Fungus. Dr. Schoenheiss, you're in distress.
Fungal infection of this kind is real, but not in humans.
True, fungi cannot survive if its host's internal temperature is over 94 degrees. And currently, there are no reasons for fungi to evolve to be able to withstand higher temperatures. But what if that were to change?
Okay, and so what we saw here is that the other scientist is like, hey man, what about me? What about me? But he doesn't want to butt in and say something, but you hear the labored exhale, right? And one thing that you can do, especially, this is really good in group settings if you want to be a very generous conversationalist, is pay attention to the breathing patterns of people around you. Because sometimes a person might not feel comfortable actually stepping up and saying something in a group setting, but sometimes what will happen is subconsciously they'll inhale to say something, but then they will hold it back. So you might hear somebody who is just observing a conversation do something like this. And so what they're doing is they're inhaling to say something, but they're pulling back and covering their mouth because they don't actually want to say it. For whatever reason, they're holding themselves back. So paying attention to the breathing patterns of people who are not talking can give you a really good sense of whether or not they want to talk. And so the host picked up on that. I mean, it was pretty obvious. That was a loud sigh, but a lot of times it can be very, very subtle.
Dr. Schoenheis, you're in distress.
Fungal infection of this kind is real, but not in humans.
True, fungi cannot survive if its host's internal temperature is over 94 degrees.
Okay, now let's pause here. So what we saw was an objection, a pushback on what it was that he was saying. And this is a really, really strong move that not enough people do in tough conversations. Because usually if somebody pushes back, our natural inclination is to reject what they said. Because he's like, hey, that doesn't occur in humans. And then you push back. But what ends up happening is that you invite more resistance because the person doesn't feel acknowledged or appreciated, or they don't even feel like you got it. And what he does here brilliantly is he accepts the premise. He's like, you are absolutely correct. And by agreeing to that point that he was making, he diminished the level of resistance that would come from his counterpoint. So you can still counter what it is that the person is saying, but you can agree to the parts that are agreeable, which makes them more agreeable to what it is that you're going to say next. So let's see how he handles this, because this is great conversational jujitsu, taking that momentum and using it against them to make your point even stronger.
And currently, there are no reasons for fungi to evolve to be able to withstand higher temperatures. But what if that were to change? What if, for instance, the world were to get slightly warmer?
Ooh, now it's getting good. Again, he's asking these questions. And the cool thing about questions is even if you ask the question and they don't verbally respond, people will always answer the questions to themselves internally. So if you're asking questions for the purpose of persuasion, you don't even need them to respond. You just need them to answer it to themselves because you've shifted their perspective. Now they're looking at it from a different perspective. And so instead of just saying, hey, global warming increases the temperature of everything, he's going to say, but what if the temperature rises, right? We come to that conclusion ourselves, which makes it so much more powerful.
Well, now, there is reason to evolve. One gene mutates, and an Ascomycetia, Candida...
And you see now the concern on the face of the host and the audience. The audience isn't laughing anymore. They are locked in. They have fully absorbed that frame.
Cordyceps, aspergillus, any one of them could become capable of burrowing into our brains and taking control, not of millions of us, but billions of us, to spread the infection to every last human alive by any means necessary.
So if that happens,
We lose.
Oof, I got chills again watching it. It is so, so good. So what made this so persuasive? The first thing they did really well is they managed the emotional environment. It's important to recognize positive emotions like joy and happiness. They can be really, really, really persuasive. But the problem with that is that sometimes it can undermine the persuasive message that you're saying if people need to be serious, but they're not being serious. Joy, laughter, the positive emotions, they decrease critical thinking. And in this moment, we want people to think critically so the audience can actually absorb the brilliance of the logical argument. Because you could see it at the beginning. The host wasn't taking it seriously. He was cracking jokes. The audience was laughing. They were not focusing. And so by really being intentional about maintaining that serious frame, he was able to pull people in. And it didn't really take that long. It probably took 90 seconds for people to get serious, but that there's some tension that can occur, right? So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the frame and asking yourself before the conversation and during the conversation, what is the frame that I need to keep this conversation in order to make it more likely for me to be successful? What do I need the people to feel in this moment for them to actually absorb this message? And the second thing that made it so persuasive is the fact that it built off real science. We understand what fungus is. We understand the impact it can have on other animals. And then we also understand that global warming is real. People might differ on how it happens, but nobody's denying the fact that the earth is getting warmer. And actually, I think that was a really, really great point that they made here in the way that they wrote this. They didn't want to tap into the energy of whether or not global warming is a hoax, is it human created or not. Then people are distracted. They're not focusing anymore. They realize that everybody can see global temperatures are rising. That's it. They left it there, and I thought that was brilliant. So by building on science that everybody can appreciate, understand, and largely agree with, it made it so much easier because they didn't even need to make the logical leap. By asking those questions as they were dropping the science, we made that leap ourselves, which made it so much more real and so much scarier. Which brings us to our third point. He allowed the audience to draw their own terrifying conclusion. Sometimes with persuasion and communication, we are almost too on the nose. We want to take somebody from beginning to end with the words that we're saying. We want to keep them on this specific journey. But what if there are times where you can give too much information? You can over-explain. And sometimes the clarity of the message is actually the problem. And I'm not saying that what he was saying was unclear. I'm saying that it was intentionally incomplete. He left these little gaps, and the writers understood that we would fill in the gaps with our own terrifying details. And it worked so well. That approach was way more powerful than that same scientist just going on a long, dry monologue. People would have lost focus. And so what they did brilliantly is they gave people, smart people just like you, a reason to believe, a reason to think that this is real, and a reason to feel that fear that comes with a classic, well-done zombie movie. And they gave people permission to let themselves be absorbed with a classic zombie story again. So how do we enter a zombie story? Not with blood and gore and violence and all of the consumption of human flesh. No, we enter that with science and logic. The writers didn't ask us to suspend our disbelief. They earned our belief. And that is a key difference. Because persuasion isn't just what you say, it's not just how you say it, it's about how well you can manage the emotional tension in the room, how you can make sure that the emotions are feeding into what you're saying, not taking away from what you're saying. So what do you think? Did I miss something? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can keep this conversation going. And if you've made it this far, clearly you found it somewhat entertaining. So please just give us a thumbs up. It takes 2 seconds for you, but it means the world to us and it helps us to reach more people. And if you want more content, make sure to follow and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you will be the first to know when we come out with content like this. I appreciate your time and I will catch you in the next one.